Or Hello, this is KSQD 90.7 weekly cutting edge conversation. I'm your new host, Galina Hale, professor of economics at UC Santa Cruz and the faculty director at the Institute for Social Transformation, taking over from Chris Benner. My guest today is Will Wiseman, a resident of Santa Cruz and a co-founder and CEO of Climatize, an innovative platform for funding climate solutions. Will, can you briefly tell our listeners what Climatize does and how you came up with the idea? Can you pinpoint a moment or experience that profoundly shaped your passion for renewable energy and climate finance?
Hey, Galina, thanks for having me on the show. So, Climatize is an investing platform that enables anybody over 18 with a US tax number to invest in renewable energy projects across the country with as little as $10. To date, we have funded nearly $10 million worth of renewable energy projects in 9 states. So far, that's 21 projects from nearly 2,400 investors so far. My climate journey really started. My father is a marine biologist and worked at the cruise labs up at UCSC. And so from a very young age, I have been in and around the marine ecosystems and saw the rapid collapse of those kind of, in particular, the reefs through my youth. And that really drove my concern for mitigating climate change. And then Climatize was really inspired by the 2019 global climate strikes, where myself and my co-founder joined over 100,000 protesters in the streets demanding action on climate change, and kind of came to see that if 100,000 of us showed up and our best option was cardboard signs, then there was a glaring problem and we needed to create a better way for everybody to participate in the energy transition.
And so when was that?
In 2019, that was kind of the peak of when Greta Thunberg was leading that movement around the world. And at the time, I was doing my first master's degree in energy engineering at the Polytechnic University in Barcelona. And so myself and my co-founder were there in one of hundreds of cities in which 7.5 million people showed up for those strikes around the world. So it was by far the largest turnout for climate action that I've personally participated in.
Wow. And so being an engineering master's student, how do you even think about starting a new business? I mean, did you need to go to business school? Where would you start? And how did you
Yes.
go about that?
So my parents run a small scuba diving travel business, and so over the course of my life, I saw kind of the potential that entrepreneurship can unlock in your life to lead course of work that aligns with your passions and enables you to live a very unique and different path. So that was always something that had been on my mind. And so when I went to my undergraduate and did my mechanical engineering undergrad at San Diego State University, I coupled that with a minor in entrepreneurship to kind of
Mhm.
build the foundational understanding and equip myself with some of those business skills. And then when I went to do a double master's degree in renewable energy engineering, that also had business courses in parallel, a bit of an executive MBA through the ESADE Business and Law School in Barcelona. But in terms of really getting started and transitioning from engineer over to entrepreneur, I think the global climate strike really kind of hit me in the face in the sense that previously I had always figured that the battle for climate change was going to be won behind the switch, that it didn't matter what you believed. If when you turn the switch on, it was clean electrons, then we would win. And then in that moment and seeing that big disconnect between all of this hope and motivation and demand for action, and yet the sad realization that we would all go home and the next day nothing would be different. I saw this big opportunity in that how could we enable everyone to become active stakeholders in the energy transition and actually be part of not only that necessary moral obligation, but also that large wealth creation opportunity.
Yeah, this is very interesting. So you started the business, and was it just as you would expect, successful all along? I mean, you're still here and the business is here, or did you experience major setbacks? And how would you describe where you are today on this journey of climatize?
It's definitely been a journey. We started actually the company in Europe originally while completing those master's degrees. And then we actually pivoted to the US in 2022. We received grant funding from the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And in that same month that we received the grant funding, we also saw that the SEC changed the laws around regulation crowdfunding, enabling projects to raise instead of 1 million up to 5 million.
Mm-hmm.
And that brought the same regulatory framework to the US as what has had been successful in Europe. And so at that time, we really evaluated the two markets and saw that we could bring those best practices from the US, or pardon me, from Europe to the US,
Mm-hmm.
and that we could be a first mover in the space given this regulatory change. And so that was a very challenging pivot. It meant at the time we had scaled to 14 employees. We had to let everybody go. We actually let two of the co-founders go. It was just myself and my co-founder Alba, essentially building from the ashes again in the United States. And that was a very difficult pivot. I mean, not only moving all of the legal and the entity information, but frankly, as a kind of emotional experience going from a kind of high energy, high morale team to back to zero and having to build from that again. That was a very challenging period for us. And then that was followed by having to jump through all the regulatory hurdles with the SEC and get our license with the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA. And so there's been a myriad of challenges to getting to this place. But
So can
now,
I ask you, how do you decide that the right thing is to continue or give up? Like I see a lot of entrepreneurs, not all the startups survive, right?
mhm,
Especially here in Silicon Valley in the tech space. How would you say one should make a decision at what point, well, maybe it's just a failure versus we're just going to tighten our belts and we're going to rise like Phoenix from the ashes?
mhm. Yeah, so I would say in that moment, we viewed it as more of a pivot than a failure. We
Hmm.
saw that the opportunity was materially larger in the United States.
Hmm.
And there were lower barriers to scale, particularly around the regulatory framework, that presented a path towards a much larger business that could create more impact at the end of the day. In the United States, you just have the Securities and Exchange Commission that enables you to operate across the US. In the EU, there were 27 regulators, a handful of languages, and a handful of currencies, and that made it very preventative to reaching scale. And so making that pivot was very hard, but we knew that it was at the expense of potentially the long-term success of what we were working towards. And I think had the company not had as compelling of a mission and vision, if it was maybe an incremental gain towards a change in the world, then we may not have pursued it. But we deeply believe that the mission of Climatize to enable anybody to become active stakeholders in the energy transition was one that was worth pursuing through thick and thin. And fortunately, on the other side of it, the results have materialized to prove that it was worth it.
So tell us where you're now.
So at this point now, we launched the 21st renewable energy project on the platform. We have successfully funded 19 to date, some of which have raised over $500,000 in just 5 days, some $100,000 in 2 hours. It's been very exciting to see the kind of community and network form around being able to invest in renewable energy projects across the country and even locally in our region. Um, at this point, the team is 8 full-time employees, so that's also been exciting. We are creeping back up on our team size, but we've also implemented a lot of technology that has enabled us to streamline and stay more lean, to effectively
Hmm.
achieve more with less, which is one of our cultural pillars. And now we have about $80 million worth of project pipeline that we want to work to get funded here in a very rapidly accelerated timeline so we can continue to accelerate the platform.
Wow, that's really impressive, Will. I remember when we first met, was it in the middle of COVID or something? We went for a week on
Yeah,
West
I think it
West.
would have been right around the period when we pivoted. And I saw
Right.
you had been mentioned in a news article. And I thought, well, she's working on sustainable finance. We should connect. I imagine we'd have a lot of common.
Yes, and I'm very excited about the work you're doing. I'll share with our listeners that I have invited Will to guest lecture in my master's class on financial institutions and markets so that the students can learn about things that are outside of the mainstream. And so maybe in this context, you can talk a little bit about what climate finance landscape looks like and what is the gap that Climatize is filling.
Sure. So when we think about kind of the scale of projects, there on one end is the utility scale energy asset. That might be big hundreds of acres of solar or large, wind turbines, nuclear. That's one end of the spectrum. And the other side is the kind of residential home solar and battery storage unit. And Climatize really kind of plays in the messy middle. So in the utility scale, that is well covered by Wall Street. Those deals are so large that you have the institutional players who essentially won't get out of bed for anything less than $100 million. And that's one end of the energy finance world. And on the other side, in the residential space, you have a lot of supporting infrastructure, particularly FICO scores, that make it easy to evaluate creditworthiness of the borrower. In the middle, there's a lot of complexity because as you move between geographies, the various permitting frameworks change, the authorities having jurisdiction have unique elements to it. And so evaluating, say, a solar project for a farm in Tennessee versus maybe on the roof of a golf course in Hawaii is a radically different
Mhm.
problem to deal with that has a lot of uniquenesses to it. And that is where we have seen a lot of success in applying AI to be able to rapidly analyze and assess all of those complexities and make that complexity more manageable. And that is then based off of my prior experience in renewable energy development the last 10 years. Our director of finance, who was previously a public defender, auditor at Deloitte, and a boutique renewable energy financier, and my co-founder Alba, who also comes from that energy engineering background. And so we have really built these systems to be able to kind of process all of that complexity and make it so that we can get to essentially funding decisions much more quickly. Because on $1 million deal, your margin to be able to kind of spend on legal, outside engineering, to be able to analyze that project is much, much less than, say, the $100 million project. And so you have to be able to use tools to analyze those projects very rapidly. Otherwise, the time that you spend assessing those assets might essentially offset any value you would get from actually financing it. And that's why that messy middle has historically lagged behind utility scale and residential scale.
That makes sense. I think these days, if a lot of people, when they hear AI, they think, oh, you're just asking ChatGPT whether this project is good or not. Can you tell a little bit of how you've designed the algorithm? You already mentioned the expertise that went into it.
Mhm.
And also, have you had any projects that failed that you have funded?
So to date, we're very proud that there have been zero losses on our platform. Now, I have to obviously caveat that for our legal and compliance team that, past performance doesn't guarantee future performance or something along those
Yes,
lines.
yes, yes.
But yes, we have been able to develop both kind of large language model based assessments, which are a little bit more probabilistic, and then also equipping it with tools, which is more of now this multimodal agentic architecture, where you enable your AI to essentially use specific tools. And then it has a little bit more guardrails and a bit more narrow focus. And so between combining the two, it is able to not only use the web interface to say, go get a permit for a project in Tennessee. So it can actually click around the user interface of the internet and then additionally use some of the best in class tools for engineering analysis and design. And then additionally, go and kind of process all of the surrounding risk frameworks, like the large language models can, by pulling, say, best practices that are published through academics, white papers, and kind of the large corpus of training data. And so I use that kind of three-pronged approach to rapidly analyze projects. So now when someone comes and applies for funding on our platform, we know exactly where the risks lie. We know if any of their documentation is missing, we can cut straight to the chase. We're able to, rapidly move through that deal review process and eliminate tens, if not hundreds of hours of diligence on each project. And, there's still a human in the loop as we're improving our systems, but it materially improves the effectiveness of the individuals on our team so that we can, again, do more with less.
Yeah, no, I'm very impressed with that, and I think a lot of people would like to hear that there is a human in the loop and that you don't just blindly follow what the computer says. And congratulations on 100% success to date.
Mhm.
So are any of your projects in our neighborhood here in Santa Cruz?
Yes. So we did a project with a company called Mint Systems that's based in Santa Cruz, right at the top of Pacific Avenue in the foot of Mission Street. And they developed a portfolio of EV charging stations at the Windmill Market in San Juan Bautista.
Mhm.
And so we were able to help them. They raised roughly $1.1 million for that portfolio of EV charging stations. And so we've actually had investors go and visit the site and
Mhm.
show up to meet the team. And then they are in the process of actually constructing that project, and we're expecting a ribbon cutting in October. So that will be coming up here soon. With Mint, they have raised about $2 million on our platform, I believe a little bit over that, and have done a second portfolio of EV charging projects in Sacramento as well. So, yeah, we've been exploring projects with them and looking to bring more to the Santa Cruz region.
And so how does it work? So they raise money from your investors on the platform, and then how do they pay you back? Like
Mhm.
pay you back from the revenues they make, or is there a fixed schedule? How long does it take to get the money back for the investors?
So it really depends on the deal specifics. And this is where I would always encourage an investor to make sure that they are, reading any of the documents associated with any of the financings. Our platform does focus on debt investments. So with that, there is a fixed interest rate, and that is essentially a contractual obligation between the renewable energy developer and the investor. And then it really depends on the project specifics. So we may be looking at state level incentives, there may be some federal incentives, and then there may also be, say, contracted cash flows associated with it as well. So in the instance of, say, the EV charging project in San Juan Bautista, there was a California EVIP grant. There were the California low carbon fuel credit standards. And then additionally, there was the federal investment tax credits. And then on top of that, we were able to see the projected cash flows from the utilization of those charging stations. And we felt that given both the projections were well within the kind of reasonable band gap, as well as the location of the chargers right there in San Juan Bautista along a busy freeway, given the fact that there was also commercial real estate there, that we could get comfortable with the kind of projected utilization
Mhm.
rates of the chargers and that cash flow. And so, amongst all of those kind of that was their capital stack formation on that project specifically. And we could get comfortable with the kind of risk profile and the potential creditworthiness of their ability to repay investors.
That's amazing. So if our listeners want to invest, how do
Hmm.
they do that? And I remember you held those coffee meetings in downtown. Maybe you can tell the listeners about that, where they
Hmm.
can come and meet you.
Sure. Yeah. So if you want to check out Climatize and explore some of the projects on our platform, you can find us at www.climatize.earth. That's Climatize. And on the, what is it, the last Thursday of every month, we host the Santa Cruz Climate Coffees event, which is a free event for anybody to come and mix and mingle and kind of learn about the sector if you are on the job hunt, if you are a professional in the space looking to meet others, if you are simply climate curious and want to come learn more, you're welcome to come and drop in. That is at the Next Space co-working space above Pacific Wave in downtown Santa Cruz, 101 Cooper Street. And you can find more details about that event series also on the Santa Cruz Works event calendar.
All right. And if I want to download the app, it's available on Apple Store, Google Store.
Yep, available on all mobile platforms, so you can find us in the App Store or in the Google Play Store. It's also accessible through a desktop computer.
So I also want to ask you a little bit about, it's fantastic that you're hosting this kind of local climate finance energy, network. I still have to find find a time to attend because I usually teach at that time. Um, but can you talk a little bit more about Santa Cruz community, which is very active and very climate aware? Have you worked with any community organizations? Maybe you can talk a little bit about the projects that you funded prior to the FINRA approval on a donation basis.
Mhm. Sure. So while we were working through our regulatory approvals, because we could not facilitate investments yet, we worked with a group based out of Hollister to essentially crowdsource donations to help fund the solar units on some low-income housing in Hollister. That was a great project. Additionally, we worked on donations with Grid Alternatives, and actually the very first time or very first way we went to kind of validate the concept of Climatize was to try and crowdfund $2,500 for my 25th birthday to go fund a small solar powered water desalination unit in Kenya. And we raised more than the $2,500 target. And actually, through that program, Andy Ballister, the co founder of GoFundMe, heard about what we were doing and became one of the first investors in Climatize. And so that was a fun kind of roundabout way of being able to get up and off the ground. And then in terms of Santa Cruz, we have this very unique culture that intersects a lot of kind of tech forward thinking with an appreciation of the natural world that we get to enjoy on a daily basis. And you have so much tech talent that has migrated from the valley over to Santa Cruz that it's this interesting intersection between really uniquely talented people and appreciation for the natural world and then access to capital through Silicon Valley. And that really provides a unique kind of sandbox for innovation. And you look at some of the companies in Santa Cruz, like Joby, for example, Supply Shift was recently acquired, Zero Aviation, there's Cruise Foam, Climatize is one. We have a very high density of kind of sustainability oriented startups here locally. And I believe that that is a unique and competitive advantage of Santa Cruz in the long term, and we should continue to lean into that advantage. So I have worked with Tiffany Wise West on the Santa Cruz Climate Action Committee, as well as with Doug Erickson and the executive director of Santa Cruz Works. And Doug even then went forward to make the kind of thematic focus of the Santa Cruz Works Accelerator planetary health. And then
Mhm.
on the back of that, recently, Santa Cruz Ventures was launched with planetary health as one of their main thematic focuses. So I've been really pleased to see that kind of some of my kind of endorsement and really working to kind of build these coalitions locally has begun to put those innovation wheels in motion because again we have the talent, we have the people, we have all of the knowledge capital both in the valley and coming out of UCSC. We have top tier research labs at UCSC to the extent that we can kind of bring all of these flows together to bring innovation to market that helps fight climate change and keeps America at the forefront of energy innovation. I think Santa Cruz has an amazing opportunity to be one of the leaders in that space.
Totally agree. So we only have a couple of minutes left. But I want to end on this question. So a lot of people working in climate space
Hmm.
sometimes find it's a little bit of an uphill battle, to say the least.
Hmm.
How do you personally maintain your motivation and hopefulness given such a large scale of the problem that we're facing and sometimes the political winds that are blowing the other way?
Woof, that's a loaded question. I think there's a balance of, for me, working in this sector is a bit of the ikigai concept of the things that you're good at, a bit of the ikigai concept of the things that you're good at and the things that you're passionate about.
Mhm.
And that carries me forward. I also feel like it is a problem that we cannot fail to solve. So when, in a sense, you have your back against the wall, the only way is forward. And I do think that it's necessary to surround yourself with other optimistic people who believe that this is something that we truly can solve and can make a dent in, and have that optimistic view of the future that we all would like to live in and build together. And if you can surround yourself with that, it can carry you forward. And a last note on this, particularly around that political conversation, I recently went to visit some of the projects that have been funded through Climatize in regions that historically have not been climate forward. So
Mm.
we've funded some projects in rural Tennessee and rural Georgia. And in visiting and meeting the people there, it gave me a deeper appreciation and understanding. And I think for some of us, the conversation is around climate and the moral obligation to protect nature. And for others, the priority is energy security and resilience in the face of natural disasters like tornadoes, to be able to provide for their family and their neighbors in times of need. And one of the interesting pieces was that one of the farmers said, "Well, let's just leave our politics at home." And I think it was a telling opportunity to just recognize that if we do step away from the political lens of these technologies, we can come to terms with people will appreciate it based on the values that are applicable to their lives. And we need to have the self awareness to translate our motives to the needs of others.
Well, thank you so much, Will. It was super interesting. Thank you for all the work you're doing. This has been Cutting Edge at KSQD 90.7. I'm Galina Hale. Talk to you next month. Bye.